The sun had long set behind the jagged hills of Elk Ridge when the lonely rancher rode into town. Elijah Boone wasn't known for many words, just his weathered hat, his calloused hands, and the silence that trailed him like a ghost. Folks said he lost his family in a fire, but nobody dared ask. He lived alone on the edge of the prairie, raising cattle and nursing memories that refused to die. That night, the saloon was louder than usual. Whiskey flowed, men laughed too hard, and fists nearly flew over a crooked poker hand. But Elijah didn't come for the noise. He came because someone told him something shameful was happening at the back, something that made even the drunkards look away. In a dark corner near the rear exit, a man reeking of cheap bourbon was shouting. "She's no use to me," he slurred, yanking a frail girl forward. She looked about 17, her face streaked with dust, eyes cast down like she couldn't hear the curses flying above her head. "She's deaf, see? Born broken. Take her for 2 silver pieces if you got any pity." Elijah didn't say a word. He walked forward slowly, boots thudding on wooden floorboards, and looked into the girl's face. She didn't flinch, but her fingers trembled at her side, not with fear, but restraint, like someone who had learned to hold back pain for years. He didn't haggle. He tossed a small pouch of coins on the table, picked up the girl gently by the arm, and led her out without a glance back. The town watched him go, some shaking their heads in silence, others nodding with respect. No one stopped him. The wagon ride back to the ranch was quiet. The girl sat stiff, eyes forward, not once turning to meet Elijah's gaze. He tried once, "What's your name?" But she gave no answer. He didn't push. He simply called her May, after the name stitched faintly onto the torn fabric tied around her wrist. Days passed. Elijah gave her space. She swept the porch, fed the chickens, and always avoided the fire pit. When he fixed fences, she followed with a bucket of nails. When he cooked, she cleaned the plates without being asked. She didn't speak. Not one word, not one sound. One evening, Elijah returned from a cattle run and found her staring at the wide-open plains. The sun was dipping gold and blood-red across the horizon. She wasn't crying, but her eyes shimmered. Something about that moment cracked open something long locked in his heart. Over time, things changed in subtle ways. Elijah would hum while working, and May would pause near the barn door, almost listening. He would call out to the dog, and she'd glance his way, just for a second. He began to wonder if deaf was a lie, or if something deeper was going on. It wasn't until a storm rolled in that everything shifted. Thunder rattled the walls of the ranch house. Lightning split the sky. Elijah burst into the stable to check on the horses. And there was May, crouched in the corner, arms over her ears. Over her ears, not her head, not her eyes, her ears. Elijah froze. His heart thundered harder than the storm itself. Slowly he walked toward her, knelt beside her trembling form, and whispered, "You can hear, can't you?" She didn't respond with words, but her head turned toward his voice, and a single tear slid down her cheek. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, rain tapping gently on the glass, trying to piece together what he had seen. If May could hear, even just a little, why had she pretended for so long? Why stay silent in a world that barely noticed her? By morning, the storm had passed, but the questions hadn't. At breakfast, Elijah didn't say much. May placed the coffee on the table, her hands careful, her eyes avoiding his. He let the silence stretch, unsure how to bridge the truth now lingering between them. Later that day, he watched from the barn as May stood by the fence, the wind playing with her dress, her face tilted toward the hills. She looked like she belonged to some other world, not quite here, not quite gone. And for the first time, Elijah realized, she wasn't just hiding from the world. She was hiding inside herself. He tried again that evening, gently. "May, I know you can hear me." His voice was soft. No accusation, no demand, just understanding. She froze in the doorway. Then slowly, she stepped outside, barefoot on the cold porch planks, and sat on the steps. Elijah joined her, keeping his distance. "I don't know how much you hear," he continued. "Maybe not everything, maybe just thunder, maybe just the pain." His voice cracked. "But if you ever feel like talking, I'll be right here." May's eyes flicked toward him, then to the sky, then down again. Still no words. But that night, she left a folded piece of paper on his table. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were just 5 words. I was safer being silent. Elijah stared at it for a long time. Then he nodded to himself, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the pocket near his heart. Over the next few weeks, things slowly shifted. She began to react to sound, the clang of a pot, the bark of a dog, the creak of a gate. She would glance toward voices, turn toward song, but she still didn't speak. Elijah never pushed. He just treated her like she mattered, not like a burden, not like a broken thing to be fixed, but a soul healing on her own terms. Spring rolled into summer, the ranch bloomed, and so did something unspoken between them. Elijah would catch her smiling at the chickens, humming so softly it was almost a whisper. Sometimes, when he wasn't looking, she would trace his name into the dirt with her finger. One day, they went to town for supplies. People stared. Whispers followed them like dust. "That's the girl," someone muttered. "The deaf one he bought." Elijah held her hand a little tighter. May didn't flinch, but he saw it. The way her shoulders tensed, the way her eyes dimmed. Back at the ranch, he said, "You don't owe anyone anything. Least of all them." She nodded once. Then, to his shock, she whispered, "But I owe you peace." It was the first time he'd ever heard her voice. It was barely audible, but it hit harder than any thunderstorm. He didn't respond with words. He just placed his weathered hand over hers. And they sat together, 2 broken souls mending in the quiet of the prairie. Then came the day her past came riding back. A man appeared at the edge of Elijah's land, horse-tied, flask in hand, eyes bloodshot with regret and old rage. May froze the moment she saw him. It was her father. He stumbled toward them, stinking of sweat and desperation. "She's mine," he growled. "You had no right. I was drunk. I didn't mean to sell her like cattle." Elijah stood between them, calm but firm. "You lost that right the day you threw her away." The man lunged. Elijah didn't flinch. May stepped forward before anything could happen, and for the first time, her voice rang clear. "You lost me the day you stopped hearing me." Her father stopped, staggered, shocked. She had spoken. She had found her voice, not for herself, but for the man who stood beside her now. Elijah didn't need to fight. Her words had already drawn the line in the dirt. The man left, silent, defeated. And for the first time, May stood tall. After that day, May changed, not all at once, but in tiny, trembling ways. She began humming softly while cooking. She asked Elijah small things. "Where's the sugar?" Or, "Can I ride today?" Her voice, once buried deep beneath years of fear, rose like a wounded bird learning to fly again. Elijah would watch her when she wasn't looking, how she ran her fingers through the tall grass, how she smiled at the horses, how she laughed, really laughed, when the dog tripped over its own tail. It was music to him, better than any song, because it was real, and it was hers. Sometimes she'd stand beside him on the porch as the sun dipped low, and without saying much, they'd just exist. 2 quiet hearts sharing a silence that didn't hurt anymore. He never touched her without invitation, never asked for more than she gave, but every time their hands brushed while passing a plate or opening a gate, the air between them warmed, and one day, as the wind carried dust across the field, May placed a hand gently on his chest, right above the folded note she'd written months ago, and whispered, "You gave me back my life." His voice caught. "You gave me back mine." They didn't kiss that day, but something deeper passed between them, something that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Friday morning, carried by a rider who didn't wait to explain. Elijah read it in silence. May watched his face change, from confusion to disbelief to quiet grief. The railroad company wanted the land, and they were offering money, a lot of it, enough to rebuild, relocate, start again. But they also gave a warning. If he didn't sell, they'd come for it anyway. Elijah looked at the hills, the barn, the fields where May found herself again. "This land saved both of us," he said. She nodded. "Then we won't let them take it." But standing up to the railroad was like standing in front of a storm. They came with threats, with papers, with men in suits who smiled with teeth but no hearts. And when words didn't work, they sent riders. One night, Elijah and May were woken by flames licking the barn. The horses screamed. The sky turned orange. Elijah ran into the fire without a thought. May followed. She wasn't the same girl who trembled in corners anymore. She grabbed buckets, called the dog, opened the pens. Together, they saved what they could, but Elijah collapsed outside the barn, coughing, burned. May screamed his name, the first time she ever shouted anything in her life, and he heard it. Through the chaos, through the smoke, her voice cut through it all like an arrow of light. He survived, just barely, days in bed, scars on his arms, May by his side every second. When he opened his eyes again, she was asleep in the chair beside him, her hand gripping his. "Still here?" he rasped. She stirred, smiled through tears. "Always." They rebuilt, with the town's help, surprisingly. Turns out, even the coldest hearts in Elkridge had been moved by what they saw. A deaf girl who wasn't deaf. A silent rancher who wasn't broken. A love that didn't need to be loud to be strong. Months passed. The ranch healed. So did they. One evening, Elijah took her up the hill behind the house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fire and rose. He pulled out a small ring. Not new, not flashy. Just simple, silver, and real. "You don't owe me anything," he said, "but I'd be honored if you'd stay. Not just as May, but as my wife." May didn't answer with words. She took the ring, slid it onto her own finger, and leaned in, her lips soft against his, like a promise finally fulfilled. They married in the same quiet town that once looked at her like a ghost. Now they looked at her with awe. The preacher barely made it through the vows without choking up. There was no music at the wedding, but when Elijah whispered, "I love you," in her ear, she replied, soft as wind, "I always heard you." And with that, the ranch didn't feel lonely anymore. Years passed. They grew older. The ranch stayed strong. Children visited. Stories were told. And whenever someone asked May about her past, she'd simply smile and say, "I was never deaf, just waiting for the right voice to listen to." The prairie winds still whispered across the land, but now they carried laughter, footsteps, and love, not silence.